I'd like to make a quick overview of what Unit 1 is all about. It's about these two words, limit and continuity. Mostly it's about the limit, but it also talks about continuity. So, what we're going to do in this unit is you have functions. The function could be written as an equation, could be given as a graph, could be given as a table. Sometimes these functions will look like a piecewise, which makes it a little bit more tricky. But what the limit is this thing right here. The limit helps us find out values that, when you plug in, don't make sense. So, for instance, if I want to plug in 4 into this, you get a 0 on the bottom. You can't divide by 0. So what we do is you take the limit as x approaches 4. Because I can't find f of 4, I can maybe figure out what happens as x approaches 4 from both sides. And that is the idea of a limit. What are we approaching from both sides on a graph? For instance, if you look at this graph, here at 3, the value is missing, but there's a value down here. But you're approaching from both sides of output of 3. So what are we approaching? For instance, right here at 1, what are you approaching from both sides? We're talking about what is happening. Since the value at the point is kind of weird, what are we approaching from both sides? What is it likely going to be? And that's this limit thing. What are we approaching? And it deals with functions that are non-continuous. So continuity basically is saying, I want a continuous function. This is not continuous. There's like a break here, there's a break here, there's a break here. And we're going to talk about those spots are called discontinuities, where you need a limit. Where you need to, okay, what would it be? Even though there's no value there, what would it be? And we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. Now, you're going to be dealing these limits with graphs. All right, like I showed earlier, these are probably the easiest way to talk about a limit. It's what you're approaching from both sides. Very visual. We'll have functions like this one or the original, and we're going to find limits. We're going to find what are we approaching from both sides. What is happening to the function, the graph? Now, looking at an equation, a little bit more complicated. And you can plug in numbers and see what happens. You can make a graph of it and then look at it really good. But we have to look at functions like this and figure out, when is there a discontinuity? When is there something weird happening there? And then we also have problems where we're just given a table of values. And from a table of values, you're trying to see what's happening from a table of values. For instance, here you can tell this table's approaching 7 from both sides right here. And if you see from both sides you're coming in, can you see the outputs are coming in from both sides about 3? So we're going to look at tables, graphs, or functions, and we're going to understand continuities, discontinuities, and how we find those is using something called a limit, and it's this notation. Now, some applications of limits are, well, you can deal with vertical asymptotes, because at vertical asymptotes, doesn't a graph have characteristics like that? So the limits, there is no value at a vertical asymptote, but limits allow us to understand what's happening. Is this graph going up, down? What's happening? So it shows a lot with vertical asymptotes. It also shows with horizontal asymptotes, because what you can think about is a graph can do like this and come up against that, and then on the other side it could come up against that. You have horizontal asymptotes with graphs as well, and limits can do that. They can help us figure out what's happening on the edges, so it tells us a lot about in behavior of graphs. So the chapter is Unit 1, Limits and Continuity. Because what happens at discontinuities, issues on graphs, we use the limit to help us understand what are we approaching. Even though maybe there's no value here, what are we approaching? And that opens up all of calculus.